You are Locked On Mets Postcast, part of Locked On Sports New York on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It was win or go home for the New York Mets, and Pete Alonso says the Mets aren't going home. Welcome into the Locked On Mets Postcast as the New York Mets come back in the ninth inning and defeat the Milwaukee Brewers 4-2 and are moving on to the National League Divisional Series starting on Saturday against the Philadelphia Phillies. A different vibe tonight on the Locked On Mets Postcast. I am your host, Chris Schubert, and we got a lot to get into here on this postcast, but this episode brought to you by Booking.com, Booking.com, Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball. Get the Booking.com app today. We are doing this show tonight. We are doing this Locked On Mets postcast on Strictly Vibes. The book, we're throwing the book. We don't need the book tonight, ladies and gentlemen. We are doing this one off of vibes because the 2024 New York Mets, just when maybe for the first time all year you counted them out, and maybe for the first time all year, you thought the magic had run its course and you thought that they didn't have the resiliency and they didn't have one more story left in them. They came through in a big way in the ninth inning. And who better to come through in a big spot than a guy who we as fans have been turning to, have been looking to for a big moment here down the stretch. And he delivered the biggest moment for this team in 2024. Pete Alonso has heard all of the noise. He has heard all of the rumors. He has heard all of the stories get written. What could have been his last game, in what could have been his last at bat. He comes through in a big way for this team. And it was the storyline going in. And when the ninth inning started and you knew that he was hitting in the fourth spot, you just had a feeling that no matter what, no matter how the game broke down, Pete Alonso was going to get an opportunity to take an at bat in the ninth inning with the game on the line. And he takes a Devin Williams changeup the other way for a home run. And I got to tell you, it didn't get out by much, but Pete knew it right away. Pete knew it right away that it was a homer off the bat. It was gone, and he celebrated accordingly. And for somebody who, I'll raise my hand, I have been critical of Pete at times. We have talked about it here on these Locked On Mets postcasts of the struggles that he has gone through, wanting him to step up in a big way. Last night after the loss, we talked about the Mets needing an inspired effort from their offense. And I'll tell you, I almost had the original version of the rundown here, because as the game goes on, I put together this rundown of what we're going to talk about. Folks, this was not the rundown about 45 minutes ago. It was not Pete Morgan Alonso. It was not the ninth inning. It was not the vibes of this team. It was going to be a conversation about an offense that outside of Francisco Lindor was missing in the most important time of the year. But time and time again, and we've said it so many times, I feel like a broken record, but tonight I don't care. The New York Mets in 2024 find a way. And when you have a team that finds a way the way this team found a way tonight, you start to believe that something special is on the table, because normally the New York Mets are on the other end of that. Normally, the New York Mets are the team that happens to. And I'm sure you can very quickly in the chat, or if you're listening to this in the podcast feed, you can go chapter and verse. All of the different times that the New York Mets have had a moment like that, maybe not to the magnitude of that in the playoffs, but have had one of those games go against them. You have your closer in a 2-run lead, and you just blow it. And for Devin Williams and the Milwaukee Brewers, it came at the worst time, just like it came at the worst time last night for Phil Maton and the New York Mets. And tonight, the New York Mets, as they have done time and time again, they took advantage of the situation. And look, I'll be the first person to admit it. I didn't think it was going to happen. I didn't think after the back-to-back solo home runs off of Jose Budo, I just didn't think the team had it in them. Outside of Francisco Lindor, the at-bats were not very good. They were not putting together competitive ABs. They squandered opportunities. I would read from the book. The book's off screen. We threw the book away. I don't have the book. I'll try to do it off of memory. But Lindor leads off the game with a double. They don't get him home. He gets on in the third with a single. He gets the second base on a pass ball. They can't get him home. Jesse Winker leads off an inning with a hit by pitch. They can't get him home. That was the traffic that the New York Mets were able to put together until the ninth inning. That was all the Mets were able to muster. 2 Francisco Lindor hits and a leadoff hit by pitch by Jesse Winker, who, by the way, the pieces of his bat I still think are scattered across American Insurance Field. they're going to have to get the grounds crew to clean all that stuff up because I have no idea where the pieces of that helmet have landed. And they didn't seem to have it. It felt like the magic was just going to run out. And the New York Mets did what the New York Mets have done time in and time out this year. They came through in a big way. We will dive in to the specifics of the ninth inning here in a second because it is where this game turned in a big way. It was where everything turned for this team, and it went from what was going to be a disappointing postcast and probably a disappointing feeling to the way the season ended to the ride ain't over yet. There is going to be at least one home game at Citi Field in the National League Divisional Series. And I don't know if we thought that was ever going to be possible at the start of the year. So that is on the horizon. But we will get into the ninth inning to remember and potentially one of the greatest innings of New York Mets baseball here on the other side. This episode of the Locked On Mets Postcast, a celebratory Locked On Mets Postcast brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.com, yeah, and you're probably going to want to pay attention to this, fans. Explore those U.S. cities you've always secretly wanted to learn more about with hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more. On Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival city during the postseason. Maybe it's time to taste test your baseball competition stadium cuisine. Luckily, on Booking.com, you can find the stadium stay that's just right for you. With Booking.com, wide variety of choices across the U.S., you can go incognito to all your baseball rival cities. They deliver exactly the right U.S. stay for you. They help you book a stay that's close to your home teams or rival stadium. No matter what team you're rooting for this postseason, Booking.com can make you a fan of any U.S. city. From hotels that overlook stadiums to family-friendly resorts to cute bed and breakfasts, Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your baseball rivals. Booking.com, booking.yeah. So I'll take a deep breath here. We're only about 7 or 8 minutes into this postcast. We've got a long way to go. We got a lot more things to recap. Just wanted to let the raw emotion of the moment take over there in that first segment. Now we'll get into dissecting what was an inning to remember. Listen, I changed sweatshirts in between. I needed to change up the mojo, change up the energy. I don't want to say that was entirely it, but things turned when the sweatshirt changed into this green hoodie. But the ninth inning is the one that we will remember forever. Devin Williams on the mound for the Milwaukee Brewers, and he had been elite, a 1.25 ERA entering this game. And I have people messaging me all over the place, and there's just statistics everywhere. So I'll just read one to you or two to you that are from this ninth inning. It had been 57 days since Devin Williams last allowed a home run, only the second one he's allowed all year, that courtesy of Buster Olney. So the New York Mets did something that hadn't happened in 57 days off of one of the best closers in all of baseball, and only the second time it has happened all year. And the New York Mets, and a guy who had been struggling, a guy who I could see the back pages now because it was set up for him to ground into a double play and that to be the lasting image of the 2024 season. And the Locked On Mets podcast with Ryan Finkelstein, where some of you might be listening to this after the fact, would have had a very long debrief about that potentially being the case and could have started the offseason content. Well, the Locked On Mets podcast, not in the offseason mode. The Locked On Mets postcast, we've got at least 3 more of these because of Pete Alonso coming up with a big home run in the ninth inning. So they get to Devin Williams, but they started off with the guy who has always started it off, the tone setter, the guy who has talked about just passing the baton. And Francisco Lindor works an absolutely fantastic 8-pitch at bat. He gets the count to 3-2, fouls off 2 tough four-seam fastballs, and then is able to draw the walk, hold the swing on the outside pitch, and he gets on base. Vientos, a youngster in this spot, the moment's a little big. He goes down swinging. Okay. You start to, feel like, all right, somebody's got to come through. Nimmo, who's struggling tonight, Alonso, Iglesias, one of these guys is going to have to come through. And Brandon Nimmo does what Brandon Nimmo does. Simplifies the approach, makes it easy. And the Mets carved out a nice little spot for themselves in Milwaukee. And it was in between the first and second baseman. How many hits in this series did they put in that spot in between the first and second baseman? It felt like all of their big hits came through that part of the field. In game 2, the Vientos 2-run single, the JD Martinez 2-run single, both came through there. Nimmo's hit tonight comes through there. And they just had an approach of going to that part of the field. In Nimmo's case, it was pulling to that part of the field. In Marte's case, we'll get to him in a little bit, it was pushing the ball to that side of the field. And they simplified the approach and they did what they needed to do. And so Lindor set the tone, passed the baton, and Nimmo did the same thing and set it up for Pete Alonso, who worked a really good at bat. Stared at a first pitch changeup. And look, Pete hadn't been taking great at bats. I know he said that he felt like he was close. It didn't really feel that way. It felt like he was behind some stuff. It felt like his swings weren't necessarily the crispest. It felt like he was just a little bit behind on these fastballs for him to go out and to attack. And then he stares at 3 fastballs, does a really nice job, or 2 fastballs and a changeup to draw the count to 3-1. And he goes out and gets a changeup on the outer part of the plate, and he sends that thing to right field. And if you blacked out in the moment from the celebration after the fact, I can't blame you, but do yourself a favor, go back and watch it, because if you didn't see it the first time, Pete immediately knew. He immediately threw the bat and started to celebrate. He knew that thing was getting out of town. He knew that thing had put the Mets in front, and the celebration that ensued as he rounded the bases is one that I don't think we are going to forget for a long, long time. And you can't help but be just thrilled, not just for the team. And we'll close the show talking about the vibes of this team and the special feel that this team just has right now. But tonight we're focusing on what the Mets were able to do tonight and what Pete Alonso was able to do in that big spot. And for Pete, look, we don't know what his future holds, right? And he, by his standards, hasn't had a great year. And in September, struggled, right? The last home run he had before this was off of a position player in that blowout against the Phillies. He hadn't really come through with a big hit. Everything had been singles, and he only had about, I think, 4 hits. I think he was like 4 for 36 since the middle of September. He had struggled in this series. He had 1 blue pit yesterday that broke his bat. And I joked, I wrote it in the book, that maybe the broken bat, maybe this is the thing that will break out for him. And he didn't have the best of at-bats tonight, but when the team needed him the most, and when he had the most pressure on himself, and we can have the conversation if the pressure of being in a walk year got to him. We can have that conversation at some point. We're not doing it now. We're not doing it in the short-term future with this team. But in the most pressured moment of the season, with the most on the line, with the most up for grabs, Pete Alonso delivered. And that's the one thing we will always be able to say about Pete Alonso in this moment for the New York Mets in 2024. He delivered in the best possible way. And then Iglesias grounds out, and you have 2 outs here, and you're thinking, okay, 3-2, and now you're starting to think to yourself, all right, well, Jose Budo's been in this game already. Phil Maton's probably not available. We don't have Edwin Diaz. We used him for a bunch of outs. Who's going to close this game? Who's going to come in? Then they showed the camera to David Peterson, and now you're asking David Peterson to do something that he's never really done before, but you knew going into this game that you had him available, more so as a piggyback to Jose Quintana, and we had a whole section carved out for it. So I'm going to use one of my 3 timeouts to use a football analogy here real quick. I'm going to use one of my 3 timeouts here. We'll get back to what Jesse Winker and Starling Marte were able to do. Jose Quintana delivered a postseason gem. Jose Quintana, who end of July, beginning of August, there were conversations of whether or not he would make a postseason rotation for this team with the way that he was pitching. And then he just decided to throw it back, be old school Jose Quintana, and just dominate the remainder of the way. And he faced this team last Saturday, and I thought pitched better than the box score indicated. And tonight, he gave the Mets 6 of the most important scoreless innings they had gotten all year long. There's probably David Peterson before that, the 7 innings that he gave them in Milwaukee in that same ballpark a week ago, less than a week ago at this point. Feels like a week for everything we've been through just this week. It's not even Friday yet, everybody. We've been through a week this week as Mets fans. And Jose Quintana allowed all of this to occur. And for Jose Budo, a guy who had been great all year, had, I think, only given up like 1 or 2 home runs throughout the course of the entire season, to give up 2 home runs, one to a guy who only had 2 home runs on the year. Like, you just felt terrible. You felt terrible that was going to be the way the season was going to end, and that was going to be our lasting image for a team that has given us so much joy. And the Mets were not going to allow that to happen, because that's what this team has done. And I wrote a tweet, and you can follow me on Twitter at @ChrisSchubert_, where I share all these thoughts before the game. And I wrote it on Twitter earlier today. This team has constantly dusted themselves off and gotten back up and delivered the counterpunch. For those of you who are regulars of the Locked On Mets postcast, we've talked about it time and time again. It's been a mainstay here on this show, that phrase that we've used, that they have dusted themselves off and picked them back up. And I thought that they had gotten knocked down 1 too many times, because early this felt like a little bit of a boxing match. We'll hit a body blow, we'll get a runner on, but we won't score. Won't be the knockdown. And they just traded those body blows, right? They just traded them. And then we got into the latter parts of this game, into the 7th inning, and then the Brewers landed the knockout, or what we thought was the knockout. What we thought was the ultimate final blow. But the New York Mets had one more counterpunch, at least up to this point, still in them. And again, you tip your cap to Jose Quintana for what he was able to do and deliver them the ability to have this opportunity late, because he gave them 6 shutout innings. Don't worry, I see everybody in the chat. Yuki, I see you shouting out. Pete, Ralph, not a Mets fan, but congrats. Appreciate you being here. Cosmo, what a game. Yes, absolutely. Samuel, how about the Mets? How about the Mets? What a night this was tonight. And let's just finish the 9th inning before we get into the vibes of this team and just how they come through in the clutch time and time again for, over and over again. They've been presented with opportunities to fold, and they just don't. They're resilient. And it's a word that I think can get overused in sports. It's a word that we can use maybe when it doesn't necessarily apply. It applied tonight, and it is applied all year for this team. They're a resilient bunch. They just find a way. Winker gets hit by a pitch for the second time tonight. Neither one was purposeful, but he gets hit twice in this game. He steals second base, and then Marte, professional hitter, continues to do what Starling Marte has done. I would probably the entire month of September, but specifically in the postseason, has just been a professional hitter, drawing walks, which he never does, just taking the ball the other way. And because Winker steals that base, he is able to basically steal an insurance run by rounding third, being able to score, and then again, obliterate his helmet into 400 pieces. That thing shattered. He slammed that thing so hard that it completely shattered. And I'm sure the Milwaukee fans just love to see Jesse Winker be able to have that moment and to be able to celebrate. And Jesse Winker, being Jesse Winker, absolutely relished being a heel in that spot and slamming that helmet down. Then you go to the bottom of the 9th, and David Peterson being asked to do something not really asked to do. If you got out of here and you didn't have to use him, he was going to be your game 1 starter, but you have to use him tonight because you need to get 3 outs, and he was available to you. And you immediately get Sal Frelick with a single. You start to get a little nervous. You start to think, oh no, here we go again. This team, don't do this to me. Don't immediately give it away because we have somebody as a closer who isn't our closer. Please don't. And then he strikes out Ortiz, and then he gets a ground ball that Francisco Lindor gets to be the person who makes the last play, throwing it to Pete. A little symbolic for what Francisco Lindor has done throughout the entirety of the season, and for Pete Alonso to be the guy who catches the last out for the moment that he provided us tonight. And, as Mets fans, we know the phrase, you got to believe. It feels a little different with this team. It feels a little different to throw that phrase around because of what they have given us over and over and over again. And we will get into that and the vibes that this team has provided here on the other side. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. PrizePicks, we have talked about it a lot here on these post shows. The best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. PrizePicks, the best place to get real money sports action. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. PrizePicks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download that's code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. G Money in the chat says resiliency and confidence is what I saw in today's game. Say it again, G Money. I mean, this team has both of those things, because maybe we didn't have the confidence at home when the 9th inning started, but this team had the resiliency and the confidence to just, I mean, that moment is so pressure packed, right? That moment, listen, a bunch of teams made the playoffs, right? And not every playoff team is created equal. And there are teams that, despite making the playoffs, despite winning, 85, 90 games, can't come through in that moment. They can't do it, right? The Houston Astros weren't able to do it. And that's not to say the Houston Astros are a bad team. That's a tough spot. That's a really difficult thing to do. The New York Mets in 2024 tonight did something that's very difficult. Now, I don't want to bring up the ESPN win percentage graphic and send the chat into a frenzy, but The ESPN win percentage for the Mets at one point in that inning, I think, was 4%, 6%. Whether or not you believe in the win percentage graphic, I'll tell you one thing. The Mets, most of the time, don't win that game. And most of the time, we've seen it before, they just go down 1-2-3, and it's pretty lifeless. And this is a somber postcast. And, you know, I honestly had prepared a little bit of a speech to thank everybody for, you know, joining us here on these Locked On Mets postcasts that we've started here on the Locked On Sports New York YouTube channel. We've started something brand new here in, you know, at the tail end of baseball season and at the beginning of football season. And you all have joined along this journey, and you've made it a lot of fun. And I had a whole speech prepared to say thank you, and that I was still going to be doing the Jet side of things, but the Mets stuff was going to end for now. And hopefully we would be back at the beginning of 2025 and have a bunch of these games to talk about, and hopefully have another postseason run. I had the whole thing prepared. It was written down in the book. You saw what I did with the book in the first segment. We threw it away. I didn't have to give that speech. We'll give that speech at some point because this team is resilient. And I put out the tweet that I talked about earlier, but I think now after tonight, after seeing what they did tonight, after seeing what they were able to do tonight against an elite closer in an elite spot on the road, how can you not think this team has just as much of a chance to go to the World Series as any other team that is still standing? It has to be put on the table at this point. This team can match up with the Phillies in the next round. They can match up with the Dodgers or Padres. They are a resilient bunch. They finally get a day off after playing 5 games in 4 days. They get a day off tomorrow. What is that rest going to do for this team? And I have it there in the sidebar. This team it's just a vibe. This team has taken us on a absolutely incredible journey, and that journey is at least going to be rewarded with one playoff game at Citi Field. That's going to be awesome. That building is going to be electric. That building is going to be rocking, especially if the Mets win one of the first 2 games in Philly and have an opportunity in that game 3 to take a 2-1 series lead. And now they get to take on Philly. I'll save that for Ryan Finkelstein and the Locked On Mets podcast to be able to break all of that down and preview that for you. But this team they are just a vibe. They just have somebody that comes through over and over and over again. And Francisco Lindor has done it. Brandon Nimmo did it in Atlanta. Pete Alonso did it tonight. Jose Iglesias has done it. You name it. Up and down the lineup, you can pick a time during the year at a critical juncture where somebody has come through. And I didn't want to spend the entire, 25 minutes of the show tonight talking about Pete Alonso, but we did a lot in the first segment about him. And it just feels right to close this postcast as the Mets move on to the NLDS talking about Pete Alonso, because I don't know if there's going to be an at-bat this postseason that carries the pressure that Pete Alonso's at-bat carried tonight. Is there anybody that's going to step up to the plate in the top of the 9th with their season on the line, potentially after being with the same team his entire career, entering free agency and having the lasting image with that team being the reason the season ended after struggling in September during a stretch where the team had to have big hit after big hit to get into the playoffs? Is there a moment that has more pressure than that? He rejected a contract at the beginning of the season. He struggled by his standards, still hit 34 home runs, but struggled by his standards. And in that moment, when he didn't need to hit a home run, just keep the line moving, just move it along, he had the clutch gene that we were all searching for. We were all begging for Pete Alonso to have a Mets moment. Not to say he hasn't had one before, but if he could have a Mets moment in this run with this team, he talked about it, that he didn't get a chance to celebrate in 2022 and didn't get a chance to finish the run in 2019 and have to celebrate. Well, guess what? Peter Morgan Alonso got his celebratory moment tonight. He got his opportunity to celebrate with his teammates. And with the way this team is playing, there might be a lot more celebratory moments in our future. I appreciate everybody. I mean, we have so many people in here tonight. We're going to break records for the amount of people and the amount of views the Locked On Mets postcast has had. And we've got more of these to come. We've got at least 3 of these. And I would be remiss if I didn't sign off by saying, please, if you're new here, subscribe to the YouTube channel Locked On Sports New York. I've got you covered on the Mets and Jets. So all weekend long, I will have you covered on the NLDS with the Phillies and with the Jets game on Sunday. Jay Berman's got you covered on the Giants side of things. And if you want to maybe peek in on what that other New York team is doing, he's got you covered over there as well. So please subscribe, turn on the notification bell. So when you go live, if you're listening to us in the Locked On Mets podcast feed, come join us. These post shows are a vibe. We have the chat. We're super interactive. We have a lot of fun here. And celebrate this one, Mets fans. This celebration, just because this postcast is over, doesn't mean the celebration has to be over. Enjoy this one. Enjoy your Friday, your celebratory Friday, your victory Friday, as the New York Mets come back in the 9th inning and they defeat the Milwaukee Brewers 4-2 and are moving on to the National League Divisional Series. Let's go, Mets, and we'll see you over the weekend. Bye, everybody.